The cemetery lay silent under a moonless sky. King Casimir walked alone among the tombstones, his footsteps making no sound on the frost-covered ground. 3 years. 3 years since he buried his son, and still the pain cut as fresh as that terrible night. He moved through the darkness with the grace of a creature born to it, his crimson eyes fixed on a single marble monument at the cemetery's heart. Prince Nikolai's grave stood pristine, untouched by time or weather. Casimir commissioned it himself, white marble carved with scenes from his son's short life. A boy learning to ride, a boy laughing in the palace gardens, a boy who would never grow older than 8 years. The king stopped before the monument, his ancient heart heavy with a grief that immortality only made worse. Then he saw her. A figure knelt at the base of the grave, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The woman wore a simple servant's dress, her dark hair falling loose around her face as she wept. In her trembling hands, she clutched something small, something that caught what little starlight pierced the clouds. Casimir's breath stopped. He knew that object. He knew it with the certainty of a father's memory. A silver raven, no larger than a child's palm, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight. He had commissioned it for Nikolai's 8th birthday, just weeks before the poison took him. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed, every line perfect, and it had been buried with his son, placed in Nikolai's small hands as they lowered him into the earth. Casimir's mind reeled. The tomb's seals remained intact. He checked them himself every month, unable to stay away, unable to stop torturing himself with visits to this place. No one had disturbed the grave. No one could have. And yet this woman, this palace maid, held an object that should have been locked away with his son's body in the darkness below. The woman must have sensed his presence because she froze, her weeping cutting off abruptly. She turned, and Casimir recognized her face, Selene, one of the junior servants who worked in the palace kitchens. He had seen her countless times over the years, always quiet, always unassuming. Her eyes went wide with terror when she saw him standing there in the darkness, a king confronting a trespasser at his son's grave. She scrambled to her feet, shoving the silver raven into the pocket of her apron with hands that shook violently. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, king and servant, separated by the grave of a boy who should have lived. Then Selene ran. She bolted between the tombstones with the desperate speed of prey fleeing a predator, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Casimir could have caught her, should have caught her. His supernatural speed would have closed the distance in a heartbeat. But something held him back. Some instinct screaming that this moment meant more than it appeared. He let her go, watching as she disappeared into the forest that bordered the cemetery. His crimson eyes tracked her until the darkness swallowed her completely. The king turned back to Nikolai's grave. He ran his pale fingers over the marble, feeling for any sign of tampering, any crack in the seals he had placed with his own hands. Nothing. The monument remained as solid and undisturbed as the day they sealed it. But that silver raven had been in Selene's hands, clutched to her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world, as if it were worth weeping over at midnight in a cemetery where she had no business being. Casimir's mind traveled back to that horrible night 3 years ago, the night everything ended. The great hall of Obsidian Keep blazed with candlelight and music. It was meant to be a celebration, a feast to honor the changing of the seasons. Nikolai sat at Casimir's right hand, his silver hair gleaming in the firelight, his young face bright with excitement. The boy loved these grand occasions, loved the music and the food and the elaborate decorations that turned the hall into something magical. Lord Draven presided over the celebration as he always did, ensuring every detail met the king's exacting standards. Draven had served Casimir for 200 years, a trusted advisor whose counsel had guided the kingdom through wars and plagues and political upheavals. If Casimir trusted anyone beyond himself, it was Draven. The servers brought course after course, each dish more elaborate than the last. Nikolai picked at his food with the selective appetite of a child, preferring the sweet pastries to the roasted meats. Then came the wine, dark and rich, poured into crystal goblets that caught the candlelight like captured stars. Casimir raised his glass in a toast to the assembled nobles, and Nikolai mimicked his father, lifting his own smaller goblet with both hands.
The boy took a sip, then wrinkled his nose. He looked up at his father with those wide, trusting eyes. The last words Prince Nikolai ever spoke echoed in Casimir's memory with perfect, terrible clarity. "Papa, the wine tastes funny." Then Nikolai's eyes rolled back. The goblet slipped from his small hands, shattering on the stone floor. The boy convulsed once, twice, his small body rigid with pain. Casimir caught him as he fell, gathering his son into his arms, feeling the violent tremors that racked the child's frame. The great hall erupted into chaos. Nobles screamed. Guards rushed forward. And Casimir held his dying son, watching helplessly as foam appeared at the corners of Nikolai's mouth, as his breathing became shallow and ragged. The royal healers arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. They examined the boy with frantic efficiency, their faces growing grimmer by the second. Bloodthorn essence, they told him, a poison so potent that no antidote existed. They gave Nikolai hours at most, maybe less. But Nikolai didn't have hours. His breathing stopped 30 minutes later, his small body going still in his father's arms. The healers confirmed what Casimir already knew in his broken heart. Prince Nikolai, heir to the Vampire Kingdom, was dead at 8 years old. The investigation that followed consumed weeks. Casimir interrogated everyone who had been in the Great Hall that night. The servers, the cooks, the wine stewards, even the musicians. He questioned Lord Draven, Lady Morgana who managed the treasury, Lord Hadrian who commanded the military, Captain Rowan who led the palace guard. No one knew anything. No one had seen anything suspicious. The wine had come from the royal cellars, bottles that had been sealed for decades. Someone had poisoned it, but the trail ended in shadows and uncertainty. Casimir ordered every bottle in the cellars destroyed. He tripled the guard around his private chambers. He trusted no one, suspected everyone, and found nothing. Whoever killed his son had vanished like smoke, leaving only grief and unanswered questions behind. They held the funeral a week later. Casimir placed the silver raven in Nikolai's hands himself, a toy for a boy who would never play again. He sealed the tomb with magic older than the kingdom itself, wards that would alert him if anyone dared disturb his son's rest. Then he walked away from the cemetery, leaving a piece of his soul buried in that marble monument. For 3 years, Casimir had visited the grave on the anniversary of Nikolai's death. For 3 years, the seals remained unbroken, the tomb undisturbed. Until tonight, when a palace maid wept at the grave with an object that should have been impossible to possess. The king returned to Obsidian Keep as dawn threatened the eastern horizon. He moved through the servants' passages, avoiding the main corridors where early risers might see him. His mind churned with questions that had no rational answers. How did Selene get the silver raven? Why was she at the grave? And why did she run with such terror in her eyes? He found his private study and locked the door behind him. The room remained exactly as he left it 3 years ago, frozen in time like everything else connected to Nikolai. The boy's drawings still hung on the walls, childish sketches of dragons and castles and adventures. His favorite books sat on the shelf, spines cracked from repeated readings. A wooden practice sword leaned in the corner, sized for a child's hands. Casimir poured himself a glass of blood wine and stood at the window, watching the sun rise over his kingdom. Vampires could tolerate daylight, though it weakened them, made them sluggish and vulnerable. He preferred the night, but today he needed to see the palace in the harsh light of morning. Needed to observe, to watch, to find answers. And he needed to find Selene. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Casimir attended his usual meetings, heard petitions from nobles, made decisions about trade routes and tax policies and border disputes. Lord Draven sat at his right hand as always, offering counsel, providing insight, managing the endless complexities of ruling a kingdom. The old vampire seemed unchanged, his demeanor calm and professional. If he suspected anything, he showed no sign. But Casimir watched everyone now with fresh eyes. Lady Morgana, who reported on the treasury's accounts. Lord Hadrian, who detailed troop movements along the northern border. Captain Rowan, who provided updates on palace security. Any of them could be hiding something. All of them had been present the night Nikolai died. Between meetings, Casimir made quiet inquiries about Selene. She worked in the kitchens, he learned, had done so for 5 years. She was diligent, quiet, never caused trouble. She lived in the servants' quarters, kept to herself, had no family in the palace. Unremarkable in every way except for one detail that made Casimir's blood run cold. Selene had requested the night shift 3 years ago, immediately after Nikolai's death. She worked from sundown to dawn, preparing breakfast for the early risers, cleaning the kitchens, completing tasks that kept her in the palace all night. Then she disappeared during the day, sleeping in her quarters presumably, though no one seemed to track the servants' movements that closely. As evening fell, Casimir positioned himself where he could observe the kitchen entrance without being seen. He waited with the patience of a creature who had lived for centuries, watching servants come and go, tracking their routines. Then, as midnight approached, he saw her. Selene emerged from the kitchens, her work apparently finished for the moment. She looked left, then right, then hurried toward one of the side doors that led to the palace gardens. Casimir followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. Selene moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had walked this path many times before. She crossed the gardens, slipped through a gate in the outer wall, and headed into the forest beyond. The king tracked her through the darkness, his supernatural senses allowing him to follow her trail even when the trees grew thick and the path became uncertain. They walked for nearly an hour, moving deeper into the wilderness. Casimir had ruled this kingdom for 400 years, knew every valley and stream and mountain. But this part of the forest felt unfamiliar, as if the land itself conspired to remain hidden. Ancient magic hung in the air, subtle wards that would turn casual travelers away without them realizing they were being redirected. Then the trees opened into a clearing, and Casimir saw something that should not exist. A village nestled in the hollow of the forest, perhaps 30 small cottages arranged around a central square. Warm light glowed in the windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. The sound of voices drifted on the night air, peaceful and ordinary. This was Shadowmere Haven, though Casimir did not know its name yet. A secret settlement that existed in the spaces between his kingdom's maps, protected by magic older than his rule. Selene walked into the village like she belonged there. People called out greetings to her as she passed. Children waved. She stopped to speak with an elderly woman who sat on a cottage doorstep, exchanging a few words before moving on. She navigated the village with the ease of familiarity, walking a path she had walked countless times before. She stopped at a cottage on the village's far edge, slightly apart from the others. Light glowed warm in its windows. Selene paused at the door, taking a deep breath, composing herself. Then she knocked, a specific pattern. 3 quick raps, a pause, 2 more. A code. The door opened, and an older woman appeared. She had kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, and she embraced Selene with obvious affection. They spoke too quietly for Casimir to hear, even with his enhanced senses. Then the older woman stepped aside, and Selene entered the cottage. Casimir crept closer, using every skill he had developed over centuries of warfare and intrigue. He positioned himself beneath a window, pressing against the cottage wall where shadows were deepest. Through the glass, he could see into a simple but comfortable interior. A fire burned in the hearth. Herbs hung drying from the ceiling beams. A table held the remains of a simple dinner. And sitting at that table, drawing on a piece of parchment with a stub of charcoal, sat a boy with silver hair. The world stopped. Casimir's heart, which beat perhaps once per minute in his undead chest, seemed to cease entirely. He stared through the window at an impossibility, at a miracle, at something his mind could not process. The boy was perhaps 11 years old now, his features sharper than Casimir remembered but unmistakable. Those eyes, that hair, the way he held the charcoal, the way he tilted his head when he concentrated. Nikolai. His son, alive. The boy looked up as Selene entered, and his face transformed with joy. He abandoned his drawing and rushed to her, throwing his arms around her waist. She hugged him back fiercely, kissing the top of his head, murmuring words Casimir could not hear. The older woman watched them with a grandmother's smile, clearly accustomed to these reunions. Casimir pressed his hand against the cottage wall to steady himself. 3 years. 3 years of grief, of visiting an empty grave, of believing his son was dead. And Nikolai had been here, hidden in this secret village, alive and apparently well. The boy had grown. He looked healthy, happy even. He wore simple clothes, peasant garb, but he seemed content as he pulled Selene toward the table to show her his drawing. Questions exploded in Casimir's mind like a thunderstorm. How was this possible? The healers had pronounced Nikolai dead. Casimir had held his son's lifeless body, had felt the absence of breath and heartbeat. He had watched them prepare the body for burial, had placed the silver raven in those cold, still hands. If Nikolai lived, then everything about that terrible night was a lie. And Selene knew. A palace maid had somehow orchestrated the impossible, had hidden the prince for 3 years, had kept this secret through countless opportunities to reveal it. Why? What did she hope to gain? Was this some elaborate kidnapping scheme, a plan to hold the prince for ransom? But if so, why wait 3 years? Why let the king believe his son was dead? Casimir watched through the window as Selene examined the boy's drawing. She praised whatever he had created, ruffling his silver hair affectionately. The older woman brought them tea, setting cups on the table with practiced ease. They sat together like a family, comfortable in each other's presence. Nikolai chattered animatedly about something, gesturing with his hands, making Selene laugh. The boy called her something, but Casimir could not quite hear it through the glass. It sounded like Mama. No, that could not be right. Nikolai knew his mother was dead, had known it since he was old enough to understand. The queen had died giving birth to him, a loss that haunted Casimir still. Nikolai had never called anyone mother. But the boy said it again, clear and unmistakable this time. "Mama, look at this part." He pointed to his drawing, and Selene leaned in to examine it. The casual intimacy of the gesture, the natural way the boy sought her attention, spoke of years of relationship. This was not a kidnapper and her victim. This was a child and his guardian, bonded by time and care. Casimir pulled back from the window, his mind reeling. He needed answers, needed to understand what he had witnessed. Part of him wanted to burst through that door, to reclaim his son, to demand explanations. But another part, the part that had kept him alive through 4 centuries of political intrigue, urged caution. Something larger was at work here, something that required him to understand before he acted. He retreated from the cottage, moving back into the forest shadows. He would return to Obsidian Keep and consider his options. He would plan his next move carefully, methodically. Because if Nikolai lived, then someone had orchestrated an elaborate deception. Someone had poisoned his son not to kill him, but to fake his death. Someone had convinced an entire kingdom that the prince was dead, had fooled healers and nobles and the king himself. And somewhere in his palace, that someone still schemed, still plotted, still posed a threat to the son Casimir had just discovered was alive. The journey back to Obsidian Keep passed in a blur. Casimir's mind raced through possibilities, discarding theories as quickly as he formed them. By the time he reached his private chambers, dawn was threatening again. He had been awake for 2 days, though vampires could function far longer without rest when necessary. But exhaustion pulled at him, making his thoughts sluggish and uncertain. He needed to think, needed to plan. But more than anything, he needed to understand what had happened 3 years ago and why a palace maid had risked everything to save his son. The next night, Casimir did not follow Selene. Instead, he watched the palace itself, observing the routines and patterns he had taken for granted for centuries. He noted who moved where, who spoke to whom, who had access to which areas. The palace operated like a living thing, hundreds of people performing thousands of tasks in an intricate dance of service and duty. Lord Draven maintained his usual routine. Meetings in the morning, correspondence in the afternoon, dinner with the council in the evening. He seemed utterly normal, showing no signs of conspiracy or guilt. But then, Draven had centuries of practice at court politics. If anyone could maintain a facade, it would be him. On the 3rd night, Casimir positioned himself in the gardens again, waiting for Selene to make her nightly journey. She appeared as expected, hurrying toward the forest with the same purposeful stride. But this time, Casimir did not follow her all the way to Shadowmere Haven. Instead, he waited until she was deep in the forest, then stepped directly into her path. She nearly screamed when she saw him materialize from the shadows. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling the sound. Terror filled her eyes, the raw fear of a servant confronted by a king in the darkness. She took a step backward, then another, looking for escape routes that did not exist. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I did not expect." "To be followed?" Casimir kept his voice quiet, non-threatening. He needed information, not a terrified servant too frightened to speak. "I saw you at the grave 3 nights ago, Selene. You were holding something that should have been buried with my son." The color drained from her face. She looked like she might faint, or run, or both. Her hand went to the pocket of her apron, touching the silver raven hidden there. The gesture was unconscious, protective. Whatever that figurine meant to her, she valued it more than her own safety. "I can explain," she said finally, the words barely audible. "But not here, not in the open. If anyone sees us, if anyone knows." "Then take me to him." Casimir watched her face carefully, saw the confirmation in her eyes before she could mask it. "I saw him, Selene. 3 nights ago, I followed you to that village in the forest. I saw my son alive and well, drawing at your table. So do not insult me with denials or lies. Take me to Nikolai and tell me how this is possible." Tears welled in Selene's eyes. She stood frozen, clearly torn between impossible choices. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Follow me," she whispered. "But please, Your Majesty, I beg you to let me explain before you take action. There are things you do not know, dangers you do not understand." They walked through the forest in silence. Casimir let her lead, watching the way she navigated the hidden paths with practiced ease. She had made this journey hundreds of times, he realized. Every night for 3 years, she had walked between 2 worlds, maintaining 2 lives, keeping an impossible secret. When they reached Shadowmere Haven, Selene paused at the village edge. "The people here do not know who he is," she said quietly. "They believe he is my nephew, an orphan I took in after his parents died. They call him Darian. He does not remember being Prince Nikolai. He does not remember you." The words hit Casimir like physical blows. "What do you mean he does not remember?" "The Nightville serum I used to save his life has side effects," Selene's voice cracked. "It gave him a chance to survive, but it took his memories. Everything from before that night is gone. He knows only the life I have given him here." They walked to the cottage, Selene's steps slowing as they approached. She knocked with that same coded pattern, and the older woman answered. Her eyes widened when she saw Casimir standing there in his dark cloak, his crimson eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Mother Thalia," Selene said, her voice strained. "This is King Casimir. He has come for the truth." Mother Thalia's face went pale, but she stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The cottage interior was empty except for the old woman. "Darian is sleeping," she said, gesturing to a closed door off the main room. "He does not know anything is wrong." "Tell me everything," Casimir commanded, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the boy. "Start from the beginning, leave nothing out." Selene sank into a chair, her hands trembling in her lap. Mother Thalia sat beside her, offering silent support. Then Selene began to speak, and the story she told made Casimir's blood run cold with rage and grief. 3 years ago, I was working in the kitchens, she said. It was the night of the feast, the celebration for the changing seasons. I had been assigned to help prepare the wine service, to ensure the bottles were properly chilled and poured. I was carrying a tray of goblets through the servants' corridor when I heard voices in the wine cellar. She paused, swallowing hard. I should have kept walking, should have minded my own business, but something in the tone made me stop. I set down the tray and moved closer to the cellar entrance. 2 men were speaking, their voices low and urgent. I recognized one of them immediately, Lord Draven. Casimir's hands clenched into fists. He had suspected, had known in his gut that his oldest advisor was involved. But hearing it confirmed still felt like a knife to the chest. He was speaking with someone I did not recognize, Selene continued. A nobleman, I think, based on his clothes and manner. Lord Draven was giving him instructions. He said, the bloodthorn essence must be added to the boy's wine specifically, not the king's. We need Casimir alive but broken, grieving. A king without an heir is a king we can control. The other man asked what would happen if someone else drank from the poisoned goblet. Lord Draven said it did not matter. The boy's death was all that mattered. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Casimir stood motionless, processing this information. Lord Draven, his trusted advisor, his friend for 2 centuries, had ordered his son's assassination. Not out of passion or sudden betrayal, but as a calculated political move. Kill the heir, leave the king vulnerable and controllable. I panicked, Selene whispered. I did not know what to do. If I went to you directly, Lord Draven would deny it. He had too much power, too many allies. Who would believe a kitchen maid over the king's oldest advisor? And by the time anyone investigated, Prince Nikolai would be dead. So I did the only thing I could think of. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial, empty now but still bearing a faint residue. I stole this from the royal healer's supply room. Nightville serum. It is a substance used in deep surgeries to stop the heart temporarily, to mimic death so perfectly that even trained healers cannot detect life. The effect lasts for hours, sometimes days, depending on the dose. I knew that if I could get Prince Nikolai to drink it before the poison reached him, I might be able to save his life. How did you administer it? Casimir asked, his voice hollow. I added it to his wine, Selene said simply. I knew which goblet was meant for him. I could see the faint discoloration in the crystal where the bloodthorn essence had been added. So I poured the Nightville serum into that same goblet, timing it so I could serve him directly. The prince drank the wine, and within minutes the serum took effect. His heart stopped. His breathing ceased, to everyone watching. He appeared to have been poisoned, and killed instantly. But you knew different, Casimir said. Selene nodded. I knew he had hours before the serum wore off, but I also knew that the bloodthorn essence in his system would kill him once his heart started beating again. So I had to get him away from the palace, away from the healers who would confirm his death and seal him in a tomb. I volunteered to help prepare his body for burial. I was alone with him for nearly 10 minutes while I washed him and dressed him in his funeral clothes. That was when I administered the true antidote to the bloodthorn poison, and I replaced his body with something else. Casimir stared at her. What do you mean? Transmutation magic, Mother Thalia spoke for the first time. I am a hedge witch, your majesty. I have some skill with illusions and transformations. Selene came to me desperate, begging for help to save a boy's life. I created a glamour, a magical construct that looked and felt exactly like the prince's body. It would last for weeks, long enough to be buried and sealed away. By the time the magic faded, there would be nothing left but bones and dust. No one would ever know the difference. And the real Nikolai? Casimir asked. I smuggled him out of the palace wrapped in linens, hidden in a cart used to remove refuse, Selene said. I brought him here to Shadowmere Haven, where Mother Thalia nursed him back to health. The Nightville serum and the bloodthorn antidote fought in his system for days. We did not know if he would survive, but slowly, gradually, he healed. He woke up 2 weeks after the poisoning, confused and frightened, and he remembered nothing. Not his name, not his life, not his father. The trauma and the potions had wiped his mind clean. Casimir moved to the window, staring out at the dark forest. His son had been alive this entire time, hidden away in a cottage he never knew existed, raised by a servant who had sacrificed everything to save him. And Lord Draven, the man he trusted above all others, had orchestrated the entire nightmare. Why did you not tell me? He asked, his voice barely controlled. Once Nikolai was safe, once you knew he would survive, why did you not send word? Because Lord Draven is still in the palace, Selene said. He still has power, still has allies. If you had suddenly announced that the prince lived, if you had moved to reclaim him, Draven would have acted immediately. He would have killed Nikolai before you could protect him, or he would have killed me and Mother Thalia to ensure the truth died with us. I knew that the only way to keep your son safe was to let everyone believe he was dead. Even you. The logic was sound, Casimir had to admit. Painful, but sound. If he had known the truth 3 years ago, he would have charged into action immediately, confronted Draven openly, and likely gotten his son killed in the process. Selene's deception had kept Nikolai alive. What did you plan to do? He asked. Keep him hidden forever. I did not know, Selene admitted. I thought perhaps when he was older, when he was strong enough to defend himself, I could reveal the truth. Or perhaps I would take him far away, to another kingdom where Lord Draven's reach could not find him. I had no grand plan, your majesty. I only knew that I had to keep him alive, no matter what it cost me. It cost you everything, Casimir said quietly. He turned to face her, seeing her truly for the first time. Not just a servant, but a woman who had given up her life, her future, her very identity to protect a child she had no obligation to save. You have lived a double life for 3 years. You work in the palace at night where Draven's agents could discover you at any moment. You care for my son during the day, raising him as your own. You have no life of your own, no future beyond this endless cycle of service and secrecy. Tears ran down Seleni's face. He is a good boy, Your Majesty, sweet and kind and gentle. He deserves to live, to grow up, to have a future. Even if he never remembers who he was, even if he lives his whole life as Darien the peasant boy, at least he lives. That is worth any sacrifice. Casimir felt something in his chest that he had not experienced in 3 years. Not grief, not rage, but something almost like hope. His son lived. Against all odds, against every expectation, Nikolai had survived. And this woman, this remarkable woman, had made it possible. I will not take him tonight, Casimir said. You are right that Lord Draven remains a threat. If I suddenly reclaim my son, if I move against Draven without proper preparation, I endanger everything. But we will end this, Selene. We will bring my son home safely, and we will ensure that Lord Draven pays for what he has done. How? Mother Thalia asked. Draven has built his power for centuries. He has allies among the nobility, agents among the guards. You cannot simply arrest him based on the word of a servant. No, Casimir agreed. But I can investigate him. I can watch his movements, track his associates, find evidence of his crimes. Draven has been plotting against me for 3 years at least, probably longer. He will have left traces, made mistakes. And now that I know what I am looking for, I will find them. He looked at Selene. Can you continue your double life a while longer? Can you maintain the pretense while I work to ensure Nikolai's safety? I have done it for 3 years, Selene said. I can do it as long as necessary. Then we will work together, Casimir said. You in the palace, gathering information from the servant's perspective. Me in the council chambers, watching Draven and his allies. Between us, we will uncover his conspiracy and destroy it completely. And when that is done, when my son is truly safe, I will bring him home. They talked for hours, making plans, discussing strategies. Mother Thalia provided details about Shadowmere Haven, how it remained hidden, who lived there, what defenses it had. Casimir learned that the village was a refuge for people fleeing danger, protected by old magic that predated his kingdom. No one there knew that Darien was actually Prince Nikolai. They believed Selene's story about an orphaned nephew. As dawn approached, Casimir prepared to leave, but before he went, he asked one more question. May I see him, just for a moment? Selene hesitated, then nodded. She led him to the closed door, opening it quietly. Casimir stepped into a small bedroom lit by a single candle. Nikolai lay sleeping in a narrow bed, his silver hair spread across the pillow, his face peaceful in slumber. He looked so much like his mother that Casimir's heart ached. The boy had grown taller, his features losing the roundness of early childhood. But those were still his son's eyes, his son's nose, his son's gentle expression. Casimir stood there for a long moment, drinking in the sight of his living son. Then he reached out and gently touched Nikolai's hair, a gesture so slight that the boy did not even stir. Sleep well, my son, he whispered. I will bring you home soon, I promise. Back at Obsidian Keep, Casimir threw himself into investigation with single-minded intensity. He began watching Lord Draven with new eyes, noting every meeting, every conversation, every decision. He paid attention to who Draven spoke with privately, who seemed to defer to him, who benefited from his counsel. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. Lord Hadrian, the military commander, met with Draven frequently in private. Lady Morgana, who controlled the treasury, consulted with him on financial matters that seemed outside his purview. Captain Rowan reported to Draven almost as often as he reported to the king himself. A network of influence and control, built carefully over years, maybe decades. Casimir also began quietly reviewing records from 3 years ago. He examined the guest list from the feast, cross-referencing it with financial records and correspondence. He looked for irregularities, payments that did not make sense, meetings that seemed unusual. and slowly, evidence began to accumulate. A wine merchant who had been paid twice the usual amount for that feast's beverages. A servant who had left the palace the day after Nikolai's death, never to return. Correspondence between Draven and several nobles that discussed removing obstacles and securing the future. Nothing definitive on its own, but together, the pieces formed a damning picture. Meanwhile, Selene continued her nightly journeys to Shadowmere Haven. During her shifts in the palace kitchens, she listened to servants' gossip, paid attention to who moved where, reported everything to Casimir through carefully arranged meetings in the gardens. She learned that Lord Draven had recently been asking questions about her, wanting to know where she went during the day, why she seemed distracted. The net was tightening. One night, 3 weeks after Casimir discovered the truth, Selene came to him with urgent news. "Draven knows something," she said, her voice tight with fear. "He stopped me in the corridor today, asked me pointed questions about my family, where I go on my days off. He was not subtle, Your Majesty. He suspects I know something." "Then we must act sooner than planned," Casimir said. "I have enough evidence to question him publicly, if not to convict him. But we need to ensure Nikolai is protected first. If Draven realizes I know the truth, his first move will be to finish what he started 3 years ago." "What do you suggest?" "Bring Nikolai here," Casimir said. "Not to the palace, but to a safe house I maintain in the city. It is protected by magic and guarded by men who answer only to me. He will be safe there while I deal with Draven." "He will be frightened," Selene said. "He has never left Shadowmere Haven. He does not understand the danger." "Then we tell him it is an adventure," Casimir said. "We tell him anything that keeps him calm and cooperative, but we must move him soon, Selene, before Draven can act." They planned the transfer carefully. Selene would bring Nikolai to the city under the pretense of visiting the markets, a special trip to see the sights. Mother Thalia would accompany them, providing continuity and comfort. Casimir's most trusted guards would meet them at a predetermined location and escort them to the safe house. The entire operation would happen during daylight when Draven was at his weakest, when most of his vampire allies would be sluggish and vulnerable. But 3 nights before they planned to move Nikolai, disaster struck. Casimir was in his study reviewing documents when he felt it. A disturbance in the magical wards he had placed around Shadowmere Haven weeks ago, subtle protections designed to alert him if anything threatened the village. The sensation hit him like a physical blow, a screaming alarm that something had gone terribly wrong. He was out of the palace in seconds, moving through the forest with supernatural speed. Storm clouds gathered overhead, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Lightning illuminated the trees in stark flashes. Casimir's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Draven had found them. Somehow, despite all precautions, despite all their careful planning, Draven had discovered where Nikolai was hidden. He burst into Shadowmere Haven to find chaos. Villagers ran screaming. Fires burned despite the rain. And moving through the destruction with methodical efficiency were 5 figures dressed in black, armed with silver weapons. Assassins. Professional killers hunting through the village for a specific target. Casimir reached Selene's cottage to find the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, furniture lay overturned. Broken pottery littered the floor, and Mother Thalia stood in front of the bedroom door, holding a fire poker like a weapon. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead, but her expression was defiant. 3 assassins advanced on her, clearly intending to go through her to reach the bedroom where Nikolai presumably hid. Casimir did not announce himself. He simply attacked. His centuries of combat experience made him a weapon more deadly than any the assassins carried. He moved like lightning, faster than human eyes could track. The first assassin died before he realized Casimir was there, neck snapped with brutal efficiency. The second managed to turn, managed to raise his weapon, before Casimir tore out his throat with bare hands. The third assassin was smarter. He grabbed Mother Thalia, using her as a shield, pressing a silver blade to her neck. "Stay back, Your Majesty," the assassin hissed, "or the old woman dies." "Killing her will not save you," Casimir said, his voice deadly calm. "But it will make your death slower and more painful." "I am already dead," the assassin said. "Lord Draven made that clear when he gave us this mission. But I can take her with me and maybe the boy too. Is that what you want?" Behind the assassin, the bedroom door opened a crack. Casimir could see movement in the darkness beyond. Nikolai, frightened by the noise, was coming to investigate. If he stepped into the room, if the assassin saw him, everything would end in violence. Casimir made his decision in a fraction of a second. He threw himself forward, moving faster than the assassin could react. The man tried to cut Mother Thalia's throat, but Casimir caught his wrist, stopping the blade an inch from her skin. They struggled for a heartbeat. Then Casimir broke the man's arm and threw him across the room with enough force to shatter bones against the stone wall. Mother Thalia collapsed, gasping. Casimir caught her before she could fall. "Where is Selene?" he demanded. "She went after the other assassins," Mother Thalia wheezed. "They were attacking the village center. She went to help." Casimir lowered her gently to a chair, then turned to the bedroom door. Nikolai stood there now, visible in the doorway, his silver hair disheveled, his eyes wide with terror. He stared at Casimir, at the bodies on the floor, at the destruction of his home. The boy opened his mouth, perhaps to scream, perhaps to speak. "It is all right," Casimir said softly, keeping his voice gentle despite the violence surrounding them. "You are safe now. I am a friend of your mother's. My name is Casimir." "Where is Mama?" Nikolai asked, his voice trembling. "I want Mama." "She will be here soon," Casimir promised, praying it was true. "But right now, I need you to be very brave. Can you do that for me?" The boy nodded slowly, though fear still filled his eyes. Casimir approached carefully, extending his hand. "Come with me. We need to get you somewhere safe until your mother returns." Nikolai hesitated, then took Casimir's hand. His small fingers felt impossibly fragile in the king's grip. Casimir's heart twisted. This was his son, standing before him, alive but unable to recognize his own father. The Nightville serum had stolen everything. Nikolai looked at him with the eyes of a stranger, seeing only a frightening man in blood-spattered clothes. "Mother Thalia," Casimir said, "can you walk?" "I can manage," the old woman said, climbing to her feet despite obvious pain. "But Selene—" "I will find her," Casimir promised. "But first I get you and the boy to safety." He led them out of the cottage, into the chaos of the village. Fires still burned despite the rain. Casimir could see 2 more bodies, assassins who had apparently been killed by the villagers defending their homes. These were not helpless peasants, he realized. This was a community that had faced danger before, that knew how to fight when necessary. He found a group of villagers gathered near the central square, armed with whatever weapons they could find. "Take the boy and the old woman to the meeting hall," he ordered. "Bar the doors and let no one in except Selene or myself. Can you do that?" The villagers nodded, recognizing authority when they heard it even if they did not know who he was. One of them, a burly man with a blacksmith's build, lifted Nikolai gently. "Come on, lad. We will keep you safe." Mother Thalia went with them, limping but determined. Casimir watched until they were safely inside the meeting hall, then turned to hunt for Selene. He found her at the village edge, locked in combat with 2 more assassins. She fought with a desperation born of terror, using a kitchen knife against opponents with professional weapons and training. She was losing. Casimir ended the fight in seconds. The first assassin died with his own knife in his chest. The second tried to run, but Casimir was faster. He caught the man at the forest edge, dragging him back to where Selene stood panting and bleeding from a dozen minor cuts. "Who sent you?" Casimir demanded, though he already knew the answer. The assassin spat blood. "Lord Draven sends his regards, Your Majesty. He says to tell you that the boy dies tonight, just as he should have died 3 years ago. And this time, there will be no miraculous resurrection." "How did he find us?" "He has been having the maid followed for weeks," the assassin said. "Once he knew where she went at night, the rest was simple. He knows everything now. Knows the boy lives, knows you have discovered the truth. So he decided to finish what he started. Kill the boy, kill everyone who knows the truth, and return things to how they should be." Casimir felt rage building in his chest. a fury he had not experienced in centuries. Draven had tried to murder his son twice now, had sent assassins to slaughter innocent villagers whose only crime was providing shelter to a frightened child. Every instinct screamed at him to return to Obsidian Keep immediately, to drag Draven from the council chambers and execute him publicly for his crimes. But he could not leave Nikolai vulnerable, could not risk that Draven had sent more assassins, that another attack might come. His son needed protection more than Casimir needed vengeance. "Selene," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm, "gather what you can carry. We are leaving, all of you. The village is no longer safe." "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. "To my safe house in the city," Casimir said. "And then, once you and Nikolai are secure, I will return to the palace. I will summon a full royal assembly. And I will expose Lord Draven for the traitor he is before every noble and council member in the kingdom. He wanted to finish this tonight, very well, but it will end on my terms, not his." They spent the next hour evacuating Shadowmere Haven. The villagers packed what belongings they could carry, abandoning their homes to uncertainty. Casimir felt guilt for bringing this danger to their doorstep, but there was no time for apologies. They moved through the forest in a long column, the king leading them toward the city and safety. Nikolai walked beside Selene, holding her hand tightly, his young face pinched with fear and confusion. He kept looking back at the burning village, at the only home he could remember. Casimir watched his son struggle with loss and felt the weight of 3 years of separation like a physical pain. They had been robbed of so much time, father and son. And even now, reunited, Nikolai did not know who Casimir was. They reached the safe house as dawn broke over the city. Casimir's guards secured the building, establishing a perimeter that would take an army to breach. He settled the villagers as best he could, providing food and blankets and reassurance that they would be compensated for their losses. Mother Thalia tended to the wounded. Selene tried to comfort Nikolai, who had finally broken down in tears now that the immediate danger had passed. Casimir knelt beside the boy, his heart breaking at his son's distress. "You are safe now," he said gently. "I promise you no one will hurt you again." Nikolai looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Why do bad men want to hurt me? I am just Darien. I am nobody." "You are not nobody," Casimir said. "You are important, even if you do not understand why yet. But trust me when I say that I will protect you with everything I have. On my life, I swear it." Something in his tone must have reached the boy because Nikolai nodded slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned back to Selene, burying his face in her shoulder. Casimir stood, meeting Selene's eyes over Nikolai's head. "I must return to the palace now. The assembly is tomorrow night. Will you be all right here?" "We will manage," Selene said, though exhaustion weighed heavy in her voice. "Go, finish this. Make sure Draven can never threaten him again." Casimir nodded. He paused at the door, looking back one more time at his son. Nikolai had fallen asleep against Selene, finally overcome by exhaustion and trauma. The boy looked peaceful now, unaware of the storm that still raged around him. The king returned to Obsidian Keep filled with cold determination. He went directly to his study and began drafting orders. A full royal assembly, to be held the following evening. Attendance mandatory for all nobles, all council members, all high-ranking guards. He specified that Lord Draven's presence was required, along with Lord Hadrian, Lady Morgana, Captain Rowan, and every other person he suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. Then he summoned his personal guard, men who had served him for decades, whose loyalty was beyond question. He gave them instructions in private, detailed plans for what would happen at the assembly. They listened with grim faces, understanding that their king was about to start a war within his own court. But they did not question him. They simply prepared to do as ordered. Lord Draven appeared for the next evening's council session as if nothing had happened. He offered counsel on trade negotiations, discussed border security, reviewed financial reports. His performance was flawless, showing no sign of the murderous plot he had orchestrated the night before. He met Casimir's eyes without flinching, his expression calm and professional. But Casimir saw through the mask now. He watched Draven interact with the other council members, nodding the subtle signals, the implied communications. Draven believed he was still in control, still manipulating events from the shadows. He did not yet realize that his entire conspiracy was about to collapse. The royal assembly convened at midnight in the Great Hall, the same room where Nikolai had been poisoned 3 years earlier. Casimir sat on his throne, surveying the assembled nobles and officials. Nearly 300 people filled the hall, the entirety of his court gathered in one place. Lord Draven stood at his right hand, as always. Lady Morgana and Lord Hadrian flanked the throne. Captain Rowan commanded the guards at the doors. Casimir allowed the assembly to proceed through its normal business for nearly an hour. Petitions were heard. Reports were given. Decisions were made on matters of state, all perfectly ordinary, giving no hint of what was to come. Then, when everyone had settled into comfortable routine, Casimir stood. The hall fell silent immediately. A king rising from his throne during assembly meant something important was about to happen. Every eye turned toward him, waiting. 3 years ago, Casimir began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, my son was murdered in this room. Prince Nikolai, heir to the throne, died at the age of 8 from bloodthorn poison administered to his wine during a feast. I have spent these 3 years believing him dead, mourning him, visiting his empty grave. But 10 days ago, I discovered something that changed everything. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Lord Draven's face remained carefully neutral, but Casimir saw the slight tensing around his eyes. The old vampire knew something was wrong. I discovered that my son never died, Casimir said. Prince Nikolai lives. He has been hidden away in safety for these 3 years, protected by someone who witnessed the plot to murder him and acted to save his life. And now, I stand before you to name the one who orchestrated that plot, the one who ordered my son's assassination, the one who has spent 3 years consolidating power while I grieved. He turned to face Lord Draven directly. You, my oldest friend, you, my most trusted advisor, you ordered the murder of an 8-year-old boy so that you could rule this kingdom through a broken, grieving king. You poisoned my son's wine. You sent assassins to finish the job when you learned he survived. You betrayed me, betrayed this kingdom, betrayed every principle you claimed to serve. The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted denials or questions. Guards moved uncertainly, unsure where their loyalties should lie. Lord Draven stood frozen, his centuries of courtly composure finally cracking. "This is madness," he said, his voice rising above the tumult. "Your Majesty, you are distraught, overwhelmed by grief. There is no truth to these accusations." "Then explain this," Casimir said. He gestured, and his guards brought forward a prisoner. One of the assassins from Shadowmere Haven, the one Casimir had kept alive specifically for this moment. The man's face was bruised and bloodied, but he stood before the assembly with the dull resignation of someone who knew his life was forfeit. "Tell them," Casimir ordered. "Tell this assembly who hired you to attack the village, who ordered you to kill a boy named Darian." The assassin spoke mechanically, as if reciting a memorized confession. "Lord Draven hired me and 4 others. He paid us to track a palace maid named Selene, to find where she went at night. When we discovered the village and the boy she was protecting there, Lord Draven ordered us to kill them both. He said the boy was actually Prince Nikolai, that he had survived an assassination attempt 3 years ago. He said to make it look like a random attack, to leave no survivors who could identify us." "Lies," Draven said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This man has clearly been tortured, forced to say whatever you want him to say." "Have I?" Casimir asked coldly. "Then perhaps Lady Morgana can explain why treasury records show unusual payments to wine merchants 3 years ago, payments that coincide with the feast where my son was poisoned. Perhaps Lord Hadrian can explain why military funds were diverted to hire mercenaries that same month. Perhaps Captain Rowan can explain why the guard stationed outside the wine cellar that night was transferred immediately afterward and has not been seen since." He produced documents, spreading them on a table for all to see. 3 years of evidence, carefully gathered and organized. Financial records, correspondence, testimony from servants and merchants. Each piece damning on its own, together forming an irrefutable case. You built a conspiracy to kill my son and control me, Casimir said. You corrupted my council, my military, my guards. You turned this palace into a nest of traitors, all working to advance your ambition. And when my son survived through a servant's courage, when you discovered your plan had failed, you tried again. You sent assassins to slaughter innocent villagers, to finish murdering a child who had done nothing except have the misfortune of being my heir. The hall had gone deathly quiet. Every eye moved between Casimir and Draven, watching this confrontation between king and advisor. Some nobles looked shocked. Others looked calculating, already adjusting their loyalties to the new reality. A few looked guilty, clearly aware of and complicit in Draven's schemes. Lord Draven stood very still, his ancient eyes meeting Casimir's across the throne room. For a moment, he seemed about to deny everything again, to continue the pretense. Then something shifted in his expression. The mask dropped. The centuries-old vampire who had once been Casimir's closest ally showed his true face. You were weak, Draven said simply. 400 years you have ruled, and what do you have to show for it? Peace, prosperity, stability. You made this kingdom soft. You cared more about your son than about strength, more about sentiment than power. I served you for 2 centuries, watched you turn us into something gentle and weak. So yes, I decided to change things. I ordered the boy killed. I planned to rule through you to restore the strength this kingdom needs. And if you had remained broken, if you had remained grieving and pliable, my plan would have succeeded. Your plan failed, Casimir said, because you underestimated the loyalty of those you thought beneath your notice. A kitchen maid saved my son's life at tremendous personal cost. A village of common people defended him against your assassins. They showed more honor than you ever possessed. He gestured to the guards. Arrest Lord Draven for high treason and attempted murder of the heir. Arrest Lord Hadrian and Lady Morgana as co-conspirators. Arrest Captain Rowan and anyone else implicated in the evidence I have presented. They will all stand trial, and they will all face justice for their crimes. The guards moved forward, but Draven raised a hand, and several guards hesitated. The old vampire had allies even now, men who owed him more loyalty than they owed their king. For a moment, the throne room teetered on the edge of violence. Then Casimir released his power, letting his full strength show. His eyes blazed crimson. The air around him shimmered with supernatural energy. Every vampire in the room felt it. The reminder that Casimir was not just their king, but one of the oldest and most powerful creatures in the kingdom. Anyone who stands with him stands against me, Casimir said softly. Choose carefully. One by one, the hesitating guards stepped aside. Lord Draven watched his careful conspiracy crumble, his network of allies abandoning him as they realized the game was lost. He did not resist as the guards placed him in chains. He simply looked at Casimir with something almost like respect. You were always stronger than you pretended to be, Draven said. I should have remembered that. You should have remembered that I am a father before I am a king, Casimir replied. And nothing matters more than protecting my son. They led Draven away, along with his primary co-conspirators. The assembly dissolved into chaos as nobles argued and guards rushed to secure the palace. Casimir sat back on his throne, suddenly exhausted. He had won, but the victory felt hollow. His kingdom was wounded, divided, full of people who had betrayed him. It would take years to rebuild trust, to root out every trace of Draven's influence. But his son lived. That was all that truly mattered. 3 days later, after the trials and confessions and executions, Casimir returned to the safe house. He walked through the door to find Selene and Mother Thalia sitting with Nikolai, helping the boy draw pictures of the city he had never properly seen before. The boy looked up when Casimir entered, and though he did not recognize his father, he smiled tentatively. "Hello, Mr. Casimir," Nikolai said politely. "Mama says you made the bad men go away." "I did," Casimir confirmed. He knelt to bring himself to the boy's eye level. "And I want to talk to you about something important, if that is all right." Nikolai glanced at Selene, who nodded encouragingly. The boy turned back to Casimir. "Okay." "Your name is not Darian," Casimir said gently. "Your real name is Nikolai, and you are my son. You are a prince. 3 years ago, some bad people tried to hurt you, and Selene saved your life by hiding you away. But you are safe now, and I want to bring you home to the palace. I want you to know your true family, your true life." The boy's face showed confusion and fear. "But Mama is my family, and Mother Thalia, I do not know you." "I know you don't," Casimir said, his heart breaking. "And I understand this is frightening, but Selene will come with you, and Mother Thalia too, if she wishes. Everyone who has protected you will be honored and welcomed. You will not lose them. You will only gain more people who love you." He reached out slowly, giving Nikolai time to pull away if he wanted. The boy hesitated, then let Casimir take his small hand. "I promise I will never let anyone hurt you again," the king said. "I promise I will be patient while you learn who you are. And I promise that whether you call me father or Casimir, whether you remember or never remember, I will love you. Because you are my son, and nothing will ever change that." Nikolai looked at Selene again. "Will you really come with me?" "Every day," Selene promised. "I will be right beside you through all of this." The boy nodded slowly. "Okay, I will try." A week later, Casimir stood on the palace balcony with Nikolai at his side. Selene stood on the boy's other side, her presence a comfort and anchor for a child lost in a world he did not understand. Below them, the city spread out in all directions, and thousands of citizens gathered to see their returned prince. Casimir had announced Nikolai's survival publicly, explaining in simplified terms that the prince had been hidden for his own protection after an assassination attempt. The people rejoiced, celebrating the miracle of their heir's return. They did not need to know all the details, all the pain and sacrifice and betrayal. They only needed to know that their prince lived and their kingdom would endure. Mother Thalia stood nearby, honored with a position as royal healer despite her humble origins. The villagers of Shadowmere Haven had been compensated generously and given the choice to return home or settle elsewhere. Most chose to rebuild their village, though Casimir assigned guards to ensure their safety going forward. Lord Draven and his co-conspirators were dead, executed for their crimes after quick trials that revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. New advisors would need to be appointed, new officials chosen, new trust built. But Casimir had time. He had centuries if needed. And more importantly, he had his son back. Nikolai looked up at him with those silver eyes that mirrored his mother's. "This is all very strange," the boy said quietly. "Everyone keeps calling me prince and bowing and acting like I am important, but I still feel like just Darien." "Then be Darien," Casimir said. "Be whoever you need to be. There is no rush. We have all the time in the world for you to remember or to become someone new. What matters is that you are here, you are safe, and you are loved." "Will I ever remember you?" Nikolai asked. "Will I ever remember being your son before?" "I do not know," Casimir admitted. "But whether you remember or not, whether your memories return or stay lost, it changes nothing. You are my son now and always. That is enough for me." The boy considered this, then slipped his small hand into Casimir's larger one. It was not a reunion, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings were all you needed. Below them, the city celebrated. Music played in the streets. People danced and sang, rejoicing in the return of their prince. The kingdom had been wounded, had come close to tearing itself apart. But it endured, held together by loyalty and sacrifice and love. Casimir looked at Selene over his son's head. She met his eyes and smiled, a tired but genuine expression. They had won. Against all odds, against centuries of plotting and betrayal, a kitchen maid and a grieving king had saved a prince and exposed a conspiracy. It had cost them dearly. It had required sacrifices that would echo through years to come. But standing there on the balcony, with his son's hand in his and the city celebrating below, Casimir felt something he had not experienced in 3 years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. The sun set over Obsidian Keep, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The Vampire King stood with his resurrected son, with the servant who had become a hero, and watched his kingdom prepare for whatever came next. The road ahead would be long and difficult. Nikolai's memories might never return. The wounds of betrayal would take years to heal. The kingdom would need to be rebuilt, trust restored, new foundations laid. But they would face it together. Father and son, king and servant, a family forged not by blood alone, but by sacrifice and love, and an unwavering commitment to protect what mattered most. The wooden dragon, no, the silver raven, sat on a shelf in Nikolai's new chambers, a reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that had been saved. A toy buried with a dead prince, recovered by a loyal maid, returned to a living boy who would one day be king. And in that simple object, in that small silver bird frozen in eternal flight, lay the truth that Casimir would carry forever. Love was stronger than death. Loyalty was stronger than power. And sometimes, the smallest acts of courage could change the fate of kingdoms. The celebration continued long into the night, but eventually, it was time to put Nikolai to bed. Selene led the boy to his chambers, helping him prepare for sleep in this strange new palace that was supposedly his home. Casimir watched from the doorway as she tucked him in, singing the same lullaby she had sung for 3 years in that cottage in Shadowmere Haven. When she finished, Nikolai was already asleep. Selene kissed his forehead gently, then joined Casimir at the door. They stepped into the corridor together, leaving the boy to peaceful dreams. "Thank you," Casimir said quietly, "for everything you have done, for every sacrifice you made. I can never repay you, but I want you to know that you will be honored in this kingdom for as long as it stands. You are no longer a servant, Selene. You are a hero. You are noble. You are family." Tears gathered in Selene's eyes. "I only did what anyone would do." "No," Casimir said. "You did what no one else had the courage or compassion to do. You saved my son when I could not. You gave him life and love and safety when the entire world believed him dead. That is not ordinary. That is extraordinary." He knelt before her then, a king kneeling before a servant, and he took her hand in both of his. "I swear to you, on everything I am, that I will protect him. I will give him the life you wanted for him. I will be the father he deserves, whether he remembers me or not. And I will ensure that your sacrifice was not in vain." Selene squeezed his hand. "I know you will. That is why I finally let you into the secret. Because I saw in your eyes that night at the cemetery that you still loved him, that you still grieved him. A father who mourns that deeply is a father who will protect that fiercely." They stood together in the corridor, two people bound by their love for a child who slept peacefully nearby. The palace around them was quiet now, the celebrations ended, the kingdom settling into the first night of its new future. And in that moment, Casimir allowed himself to believe that everything would be all right. The road ahead was long, but they would walk it together. The scars would heal. The memories might return. And his son, his precious son, would grow up safe and loved and free from the shadows that had nearly consumed him. The Vampire King had lost his son once and found him again. He would not lose him a second time. No conspiracy, no betrayal, no force in this world or any other would take Nikolai away again. That was his vow, that was his promise, and Casimir always kept his promises.